Over the years, Pixar has been known for their incredible attention to detail in their films and their ability to sneak in any number of little Easter eggs. And their latest feature, Soul, that recently released on Disney Plus, is no different. Since Soul is a movie about life and the little things that make it worth living, there's really much more going on than just a funny little body-jumping mishap. From the expected web of references that stretches all across Pixar's body of work, to numerous shoutouts to famous people and some interesting design choices. Soul is filled to the brim with tiny little details that you may not notice on a first watch, where you're entirely too busy being wrapped up in all the existentialism that pours out of literally every frame. Luckily, that's why we're here. We're gonna comb through Soul for a whole bunch of interesting little things that you might have missed. Considering that the only other numbered soul mentioned in the movie is somewhere in the hundreds of billions, we can assume that 22 is an old soul. But there's actually a deeper meaning to the number. 22 wants to avoid having to be born, but can only do so by getting rid of their personality sticker. That can only be done by turning it into an Earth ticket, which can only happen once its owner discovers a desire to live. And wouldn't you know it, there's a term for this kind of unsolvable problem, namely, a catch-22 dilemma. Soul is the first Pixar film to not receive a theatrical release, instead releasing on Disney Plus in December 2020 due to, let's just say, worldwide conditions. This results in one part of the movie aging like milk. At the very end of the credits, Terry will pop up and tell the viewer,
"Hi! Movie's over! Go home!"
What would have been an amusing shout out to Ferris Bueller's Day Off in theaters thus ends up becoming little more than an awkward reminder at home. Whoops. This is extra odd when you spot a different credits joke. While Soul was in development long before anyone could have known what working conditions in 2020 would be like, there is a part of the credits that read, created and produced at Pixar Studios and in homes at least 6 feet away from each other in the Bay Area. Why this was added yet no one thought to put a muzzle on Terry is anyone's guess. There's an early line in the movie that foreshadows Joe's fate in two very different ways. When first informed that he has a shot at playing with a big shot jazz star, Joe remarks that,
"I would die a happy man if I could perform with Dorothea Williams."
and as we all know, he does, shortly after getting the job. But after he actually got to play the gig and finds it oddly underwhelming, Joe vows to live the rest of his life to the fullest, and will most likely eventually indeed die a happy man. One of the movie's major lessons is that while ambition is perfectly fine, it's not the only meaning of life itself. Joe ends up going on a wacky adventure that forces him, and by extension the audience, to learn this lesson the hard way. But much like how he should have paid more attention in life, he could have learned this less than 20 minutes into the movie, as Jerry actually explains the true meaning of the spark very early on.
And just what is this spark?
Joe simply doesn't listen. You didn't really think that Jerry's would just forget to clarify something that essential, would you?
Oh, you mentors and your passions, your purposes, your meanings of life. So basic.
A running gag in the film is that 22 has had many famous mentors, some of which get name-dropped and shown directly, such as Carl Jung, Muhammad Ali, and Abraham Lincoln. But if you pause the movie to take a look at 22's wall of mentor name tags, you can find quite a few interesting ones. These include Joan of Arc, Martin Luther King Jr., comic book artist Jack Kirby, and Disney legends such as Joe Grant and Joe Ranft. Fittingly enough, for a movie titled Soul, you can also spot soul singer Aretha Franklin. Now that's respect if I ever saw it. Speaking of musical idols, Dorothea Williams is apparently so popular an artist that her music transcends realities. In Pixar's earlier film Onward, which takes place in a world where our modern day society was built on top of a Tolkien-esque fantasy world and is now inhabited by elves, centaurs, fairies, and more, you can spot one of her CDs in the Lightfoot household. Who knows? Maybe that's the music that Mr. Lightfoot is actually doing his dorky dad dance to. I mean, it's not like he can hear that music player anyways with no head, right? When Joe first arrives in the Great Beyond, he meets quite a few other recently deceased souls. But for Korean-speaking viewers, there's one soul in the bunch that might have died in an extra embarrassing way. When a panicking Joe is forcing his way through the crowd of souls, the soul of a Korean woman yells, "I'm not wearing pants," and quickly covers up her nethers. Sure, all the souls are designed to look like little bean people, but nobody else seems to mind their apparent nudity. so I'll just let you guys imagine what she might have been up to before she passed. At one point, Joe, in a cat's body, drags a slice of pizza through the streets of New York, only to meet a rat doing the exact same thing. You might think that this is a reference to Remy from Ratatouille, but that's not all there is to it. It's actually a shout out to the popular Pizza Rat video that stand-up comedian Matt Little posted on YouTube in 2015, where a rat drags a slice of pizza down the stairs at First Avenue L Station in Manhattan. Matt jokes in the description that this must have been Master Splinter trying to feed his 4 teenage sons. And now I can't help but imagine that Shredder and the Turtles are fighting on a rooftop somewhere while Joe is playing jazz. New York is a wild place, man. There's no denying it. Moonwind and his band of mystics, while very successful at healing lost souls, are basically one giant hippie joke. And if the 10 die sails on their ship somehow don't tip you off to this immediately, there's another huge tell about them before we as much as hear any of their totally groovy names. That song they're listening to when we see them rescue Joe in 22, that's the famous Subterranean Homesick Blues by counterculture icon Bob Dylan. In his first top 40 charting song and one of the earliest songs in general to get what is essentially a music video. Since we're talking about Moonwind and his crew anyways, we might as well bring up the name of their little outfit. Mystics Without Borders. Mystic is a broad term for people who believe in perceiving a state of reality that goes beyond the physical world. But the name is also a reference to a real-life group, Doctors Without Borders, a non-governmental humanitarian group of doctors, nurses, and other medical and environmental experts who travel across the world to help in areas of crisis. Considering they essentially offer therapy to lost souls regardless of location in the physical world, it's a very fitting name indeed. The fact that Joe ends up in a cat body might seem like an overused comedy trope. And sure, in universe, it's purely an accident. But it's actually very fitting for a die-hard jazz musician like Joe to become a cat. After all, cat is a very common slang for a jazz musician, like a cool cat or the like. In fact, like almost everything in Soul, it's brought up early on, as his former student uses the term when he first introduces Joe to Dorothea.
Hey, Dorothea, this is the cat I was telling you about.
Would he perhaps have ended up in a dog body if the movie had been about early 90s rap music? The world will never know. Speaking of the cat, there's a little odd inconsistency that may be explained by another common saying. When Joe and 22 leave the great beyond to return to Earth, Joe somehow ends up inside of the therapy cat lying in his body's lap. To explain how this happened, we briefly get a humorous clip of the cat's slightly confused soul sitting on the escalator to the afterlife, implying that it just happened to die at the same time. Yet later, when Joe eventually regains his own body, the cat is seen alive and well. How is this possible? Well, you know what they say about cats, right? They all have 9 lives, of course. The Tubby Tabby just spent one of his, that's all. One of the patrons in Dez's barbershop is a younger man named Paul, who keeps mocking Joe for his failed music career. 22 is quick to deduce that this is simply because Paul is trying to cover up his own musical failures. If only 22 knew that in a bit of an ironic tongue-in-cheek casting, Paul is actually voiced by the very successful actor and musician Daveed Diggs, who is known for his roles in the Broadway play Hamilton and movies such as Wonder and Blindspotting. Well, if they knew that, they might just sing a different tune. And now for some classic prop recycling. There's nothing Pixar movies love more than dumping references to their earlier work absolutely everywhere, and the Hall of Everything contains a boatload of them. There is, of course, the ever-present Pizza Planet truck and A113, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. You'll have to pause the movie to look close to catch them all. But among other things, you can spot the Spirit of Adventure from Up hanging in the sky along with the Axiom from WALL-E, just to name some of the more obvious examples. You probably already know that the lamp in the Pixar logo originates from one of Pixar's earliest short films, Luxo Jr. from 1986, where a cute little baby table lamp ends up squishing the ball it spends the whole short playing with. While not only does the lamp itself appear in the Hall of Everything, the ball can also be found in the movie, though it can be a little hard to spot. Still, pay attention when 22 shows off their little cardboard box home to Joe early on in the film, and you'll spot a familiar looking ball tucked away. Perhaps 22 is trying to prevent it from getting killed by Luxo Jr. Again. When a Jerry explains to the mentors that newborn souls may find their spark in the Hall of Everything by trying out various activities, we see one soul being ecstatic to hit the bullseye on 3 targets in a row while practicing with a bow and arrow. This is exactly what Merida did herself in the Pixar fantasy film Brave, when she schools her rather pathetic gaggle of would-be suitors at the archery contest, just with slightly less Robin Hooding.
He spit at Robin Orange arrow in twain!
Could this be the soul of our fiery Scottish Pixar princess? Pixar universe theorists, place your bets. You'd think that the Hall of Everything would be the one-stop shop for every Pixar prop present in the film. Say that 10 times fast. But you'd be wrong. There's one iconic prop that is seen primarily in the world of the living, and that would be the Chinese takeout box, a prop that is almost as prolific as the Pizza Planet truck. First seen in A Bug's Life as a makeshift circus prop, it has since appeared in Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., and Ratatouille, and in both dinner scenes in Inside Out and Incredibles 2. It's sort of blink and you miss it, but you can spot it on the hedge fund manager's desk, and later when 22 in Joe's body knocks over a garbage bin in New York City. Alright, let's try and cram one more Pixar prop into this movie. Remember Inside Out? And remember how one of the reasons the family had to move in the first place was due to Riley's dad being part of a tech startup called Brang? Well, if you were worried about the future of that company, you needn't be, as 5 years later they're apparently doing well enough to be able to afford ads on the subway, judging by the banner that you can barely see when Joe and 22 try to make it across town. Good for them. While we're on the subway, take a closer look at the subway card Joe and 22 get on after meeting the guitarist. It has a nice big 2319 written right there. If that number sounds familiar, it's because that's the code for a human contaminant alert heard early on in Monsters Inc., the first movie Peter Docter directed at Pixar.
2319! We have a 2319!
And I mean, it is the New York subway after all. That certainly qualifies as human contaminant. It's common knowledge that Pixar loves to leave a little call forward to their next movie. Heck, we've already pointed out the album in Onward, so it's no surprise that Soul includes a reference to the studio's next film, Luca, a coming-of-age story set in the Italian Riviera, currently slated for June 2021. In one window, you can see a travel agency ad telling the buyer to fly Luca Airlines. I wonder if you fly there on one of Disney Toon's planes. Or do we not talk about those? You know what? Yeah, let's not talk about those. While Pixar sort of does their own thing independently at Walt Disney Studios, they are nonetheless a part of Disney, and it shows. Early on in the film, when Joe is mistaken for a child psychologist, he and 22 briefly visits the Doctor's Hall of You, where we're treated to a few glimpses of his illustrious life. This includes the statue of the good doctor holding a child's hand, pointing off to the horizon as if towards a brighter future. Now, this statue's pose is almost completely identical to the partner statue found in various Disney parks across the world, which shows Walt himself holding the hand of that famous little mouse that kicked it all off, as if showing him all the things they'll accomplish together, or all of the things that they'll someday own, which is everything. Another time-honored Pixar tradition is the actor John Ratzenberger getting at least one role in every Pixar movie. His parts so far have included Ham in the Toy Story films, The Abominable Snowman, and P.T. Flea, just to name a few. But curiously, he is not actually credited in Soul, leading many to believe the tradition had finally been broken. Thankfully, that's not actually true, but he is pretty well hidden. When Joe is in his own Hall of You, reliving the painful memories of his various failed auditions, we hear many voices telling him the bad news. And among them, you can briefly hear Ratzenberger. It may be his smallest role yet.
We're looking for something different.
But with the film's themes of not letting your ambition or your failures define you, it's certainly no less impactful. One of the most striking things about Soul is the design of the Jerries, the universal forces that help assign newborn souls their personalities. They truly look otherworldly and unique, but they aren't just randomly abstract. They share quite a few similarities with many of the famous painter Pablo Picasso's portraits, most notably the tendency to put both eyes on one side of their nose. One of them also bears a resemblance to the modern version of the Kokopelli figure, a Native American fertility deity who is also depicted as the spirit of music. If I didn't know better, I'd be tempted to say music is a big theme in this movie or something. In fairness, this last one may be a bit of a coincidence, but it's worth pointing out all the same. Of all the abstract figures in The Great Before, Terry sticks out quite a bit from the Jerries. While she shares their overall traits, such as the lines, she is much shorter and more angular in design than the softer, more rounded Jerries. And when moving around in the world of living, she does so by scurrying along a straight line. All of this is very reminiscent of the simplistic Italian cartoon character known as La Linea, literally meaning the line, created by Osvaldo Cavaldoli in 1969, who would walk along a line and interact with things drawn on it along the way. Whether this is on purpose or not, it certainly helps Terry stick out from all the rest. You know, for a movie called Soul, they don't really actually mention soul much in terms of music, even with Joe talking everyone's ear off about jazz all the time. Sounds like false advertising to me. I kinda want my money back. Then again, maybe it's on purpose? Nah, see what I did there? You guys are no fun.